Hello, Martin here from Gemini Walk and and today we're going to talk about learning languages, how to learn lots of languages fast, and how you can get fluent, what is an efficient learning system. I have learned many languages. I am fluent in two, which is my native Bulgarian, and English is basically at a native level, high level as well. You can go watch any of my videos and you'll tell. I can speak off the top of my head for hours in English without any hesitation. And I also know some Japanese, Spanish, and French and Russian to the degree that if I go to those countries, I can get by okay. And the locals are able to communicate with me on a very basic level, and I can get some help and things that I need. And so that's something like 6 languages. My biggest failure is German, which I took for 4 years in high school, and I cannot say a single sentence in German. So I'll explain how I went about learning these languages and how you can learn a language fast without having to struggle too much. It is actually very difficult and very complicated to learn a language well, because there's such a great length you can go in any language, and it's a complicated matter. Speaking language is one of the most complex things we do as humans. And so how do you go about learning another language? And then there's the issue that language is really how you think. We think in language, and therefore you have to change the way you think, and you have to expand your mind in such a way that you normally don't when you stick to your native language. So let's begin. I'll recap a little bit first how I learned English so well, and that started very early. I started learning English when I was 6 years old, because my parents, they were fans of the West in a way. They were growing in their whole lives, they were behind the Iron Curtain, and as soon as it fell in 1990, and they were able to sign me up for English lessons, they did. Me and my brother went to summer school and studied English, and that happened before I had even started my elementary school. So I have studied for a very long time, and that's number one. Language learning takes a long time, but there are some shortcuts you can take and get there faster, and depending on your goals. And I'll explain too how each strategy about learning a language fits with your goals. So for English, yes, first I went to summer school and I learned a bunch of English. And then I remember having a picture book, a picture dictionary pretty much, where I was learning. You would have a picture, airplane, etc., tree, and I was learning that way. After my schooling was over, I was going over the picture book even when I wasn't attending any English classes. And so I think soon after, in about 3rd grade, maybe 2nd, 3rd grade, I started school, English in school officially, but also my entire life, my entire schooling, I would go to school 5 days in the week, like every child. And on the 6th day, my parents paid for a private English school, which happened every Saturday, and it was basically the length of a school day. So my whole life I went to school 6 days a week, not 5. And on the 6th day, I learned only English. And then my schooling itself started teaching English sometime, probably 3rd, 4th grade, I can't remember. And so that started doubling up. And I was able to get ahead so much that I was always the first or the best in my class for English. My entire schooling until age 18, I was really the best. And it took that much, just the entire time, an extra day of English. And what I did learn is, the proper way from the books, how to make proper sentences, grammar, spelling, etc. I was taught the classic way of learning English. But I will say this is the slow way, because it takes a very long time to go the classic way and to become proficient and comfortable enough that you can start having conversations. So, they're teaching you to learn these sentences and structures in grammar and words, and you're building up your vocabulary. And that's all great and needed. But if you are doing that, you actually aren't ready for having conversations for a long time. And what I did is I started, as soon as I got a few years into it, I started going out in town, and I was looking for tourists who speak English, and I was starting to practice with them. I was talking to the tourists, and that's yet another way to learn. Then I started seeking out things in English, like songs, little books for children at first, then complicated books, and starting to play video games as well in English. And I also had a computer since I was about 5, and by 8 I was coding on my own, and all that stuff was in English as well. So you see the immersion, and that's the number one key thing about learning a language. You need to immerse, because you can do all the books, all the exercises, etc. If you don't immerse, it will just be slow, and it will also go away. So you need to immerse yourself, and therefore learning the culture together with the language, to me, is the number one way. You have to immerse. So if you're going to learn a language, and you should choose one where there's a good culture, an abundant, rich culture that is accessible to you, so that you can use all these cultural things that I just mentioned to be able to learn, to immerse. And so I did all that. One of my favorite ways was point and click adventure games in English language. From an early age, those games were very text heavy. And I would literally sit there with a giant dictionary. I was like this child, 7, 8, and 9 years old, sitting with 2 massive dictionaries, volumes like this. And whenever I encounter a word in the game that I don't know, I look it up the old way with the paper. So this word, turn to page 78, where all the words with C begin. And that word means that. Oh, look, there's another 3 words in this sentence I don't know. So I look them all up, I write them down. And I kept going and going. So basically, 6th day of schooling all in English. And then in my hobbies, in my pastimes, I was also immersed in the English. And so I was conversational before I was even 10 years old. As a child, I was already able to converse in English quite easily. And then I had also started realizing that all this immersion is making me want to live in the West. And by age 13, probably because of all this schooling and immersion I had decided to move to the USA, and I had started looking up what it takes. And I found about tests like TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language, and the SAT, and how they are required for foreigners to come to study in American colleges. And so I started preparing for those tests. At that point, those tests take you to a very high level of English, far beyond actually what the average American studies in their schooling or normal lives. Especially the SAT, I have to say that is a very complicated test which uses language that you actually never use again. And actually I'm against the SAT as a requirement, because you don't use it. The math in there you don't use, the English in it you don't use. You simply pass the test for the sake of passing a test, but it takes you like a year or 2 to prepare. It's ridiculous. So I did do it. I did get a good score, and I just never used any of the SAT stuff again. But the TOEFL test was actually very, very good. It was real good English, and I only had 2 mistakes on the entire test, I believe. So I had almost maximum score on that test. And so all the doors were open that way for me. I was also able to write essays in English, so I did that as a teenager a lot. Another huge way which I learned was I started going in American chat rooms, which comes with some danger, by the way. You can get exposed to nasty things, but I didn't really. When I think back, I didn't get into anything like that. So I would go and hang in chat rooms, and people would speak in English. And the big thing is that you can learn all you want from the books, but that's not how people actually talk in any country. The way the people talk is what's so-called colloquial or spoken language, spoken English, and they do it differently. There's slang, there's just casual way of speaking, and you don't learn that from the books. And even from movies you can pick some of it up, but movies are theatrical, they're not actually how people talk either. And so I started hanging out in the chat rooms on the internet. As soon as I got internet, I was pretty hooked on that, because it was my true exposure easily to a lot of English speakers. And I did that, and it was really beneficial to me. There are some games you could play, like a massive multiplayer game, where you just go and the entire thing is in English A to Z. The games were text-based, heavily text-based, and then all the players there talk English in chat rooms. And so that gave me the ability to speak on par with native English speakers. And it was invaluable, honestly. You can think, oh, games are a waste of time, etc. But I actually learned a huge amount of the English I know from games and from the internet chat rooms. Then, so that's English. Again, I studied English for so long and in so many ways that English, I know it by the book and I know it casually. I know slang, I know cultural nuances. I know just about everything there is to know about it. I know how in America people use different types of English language by region, etc. Different demographics speak differently. I can pick up on any of that, all the cultural nuances. And I was already able to do that when I arrived here. But of course, I've gotten better at it since then. Another thing is that simply speaking a lot is the way to go. Even though I had studied so much, I hadn't been raised in that. So I came here, there was still some hesitation at first, some degree of confidence that you can express yourself well. And so I actually took a job, and I did that on purpose. I took a job selling shoes at Nordstrom, where what I did for 8 hours a day is talk to people. I would talk to customers and coworkers all day long. And after that, I did that for a year and a half. I never had any hesitation talking in English again. It just was natural to me. And that's the number one thing. Well, you need to get to the level where you've done it so much that you become natural. The thoughts come to you quickly, etc. And that's really the top of fluency. However, all that I described, this whole path, took a long time, since 6 to 20 years old or something like that. So 14 years of studying a language. Of course you will learn it well. Now, you may not learn it as well as I did with English, because I did that extra hard. But that long is a long time to study any language, and you will learn a lot. However, you don't have that much time to do that with too many more languages. So I wanted to know more, because as you travel the world, you quickly realize, unless you know the native language, at least to some degree, you have a very kind of secondary experience. You don't have the top experience or the natural experience or the richest experience when you go places. And so I started realizing that there are certain cultures which I like a lot, and I would like to be able to talk to these people freely, or at least on a little bit better level than trying to speak English to everyone. So I studied Japanese, for example, and I got to something like kindergartner level, 5-year-old level, and I took a test. Actually, Japan has government testing for foreigners, and I believe the test has 4 grades, at least it did before. I passed the first one, which puts you something like elementary or a kindergarten level, and I passed the test rather easily. I could have continued learning English, but I had a lot of plans to. I knew that I had to immerse harder if I'm going to become fluent in Japanese, for example. And I just, my life took a different direction. I got into my career in America, and I didn't go to Japan since 2009 now. And I'm going again very soon, so I'm brushing up on my Japanese. But because of that, I actually stopped learning, and a lot of it faded, and I didn't continue past that kindergarten level, and now I've forgotten it. So if I study hard for several months again, I'll get back to that kindergarten level, I think, before our trip to Japan soon. So that's my goal. And that's the thing, you learn it and then you forget it. But the way I learned Japanese, I also went by the book. I went to the Japanese Learning Center in Seattle, and I took night lessons there for a while. Then I went to college, and I took 2 or 3 quarters of Japanese as well. And so that's how I did get to the kindergarten level. And I was able to read as well. I knew something between like 800 and 1,000 symbols. And learning Japanese, again, by the book. I also watched the movies and the cartoons, etc. some of the better ones. There was the movie by Hayao Miyazaki's Ghibli studio called Ponyo, which is meant for something like 5-year-olds. And I was able to understand maybe 70-80% of that movie at the peak of studying Japanese. And I went to Japan as well, and I could understand a few things and stuff like that, and it felt great. However, yeah, it all faded, and that's the real big problem with learning languages. As soon as you learn them, you actually have to apply that, otherwise it will go away. And then when it comes to other strategies which are more of a shortcut, I started doing that later on. And for example, with Spanish, I have never officially learned Spanish in any form of class or anything like that. But I've been to Latin America, I don't know, now 5-6 times already. And every time I go, I pick up some. And there also is a lot of exposure just simply living in the USA of Spanish. And so I have basically allowed it to naturally increment. And I just still have the interest, you know, whenever I see something in Spanish, I'll look into it a bit more deeply than simply glancing at it. And I'll be like, what's this word, what's that word? And there's also the fact that my wife, Susie, she went to Spain for college for half a year. So sometimes I ask her, what does this mean? What does that mean? How do you say this and that? And sometimes I'll do a little bit of some kind of app, like Duolingo or Rosetta Stone. But I've never gone to a large extent. And yet, because Spanish has a lot of commonalities with English and other Latin-based languages, and because it's so much around me, I've been able to get to a level of Spanish where, you know, I'll hear it spoken, I'll know a bit of what they're saying. When I'm there, I'll say certain things that I need to say. And it feels much better than knowing zero in that language. So, you know, when I go to a Spanish-speaking country, I can read the signs because the alphabet is the same. I know what a lot of words say. And there was a learning system, and now I'm going to start talking about learning systems a bit more. So there was a learning system which I came across. It was in audio, and I'll get the name. I need to remember the name. But it was a very interesting system because it basically tells you how you know something like 5,000 words in Spanish simply by being an English speaker. And that is actually really valuable because learning that much vocabulary is the hardest thing for you in the end, in the long run, because you want the rich vocabulary to express yourself. And in the case of Spanish, Spanish and English have common Latin roots, at least influence. And there are 5,000 words which you can actually use if you know how to adapt them. So basically, if you know the English word, like say intelligence, you can adapt it to Spanish, inteligencia, or stuff like that. And you can easily then increase your vocabulary massively. So that's one thing I realized at that point, that there are learning systems and there are shortcuts which you can take. And you also can look for commonalities between the languages that you already know and the ones that you're trying to learn. So, you know, European languages are going to have a lot of commonalities. In the case, I already know Bulgarian, which is a continental Slavic European language, but it also borrows a lot from other European languages. So there are many words which are the same as English, as Spanish, as French, as Russian. And so that body of knowledge is already there for you. And that's really, really good. So my strategy with Spanish has been basically to learn it for free to whatever degree that I pick up, either from living in the USA or from already knowing a lot of words from the other languages I know, or simply, coming across it. And then that experience, just learning it so easily and for free on a basic level, let me think that I can probably do that again. And then I went to France, and in the case of France, that language also is very related to both English, which I already know, and Spanish, which I knew some of. And again, you can adapt thousands and thousands of words, and it comes to you very much more easily. Especially English is so related to French because the French, you know, the Normans, they were Viking, but they lived in France and they conquered England. And then English picked up a huge amount of French words that way. Therefore, the English heritage or the French heritage in English actually gives you a knowledge of French, a lot of it. And so because of that, learning French has been much faster than I thought it would be. And I spent time studying Duolingo, and that's simply for the sake of vocabulary for the most part. And I also found a very good learning system on audio by someone named Paul Noble. And his way of learning I find to be one of the best. It is strictly audio, so it's geared at speaking. And he does it simply through repetition. It's actually rather amazing. He will tell you from zero, you start with zero knowledge, and he will tell you how to make a very basic sentence. And then he continues building on that knowledge word by word, sentence by sentence, for something like 8 to 10 hours in the book. And then there's an advanced version as well. And in the end of that, you actually will be quite conversational in a brand new language. So I did that with French. I recommend that strongly. It's a very good shortcut to begin speaking. And other important or smart systems are famously Rosetta Stone. There's an audio course, very extensive and long, called Pimsleur. There also used to be, and still are, very many language learning podcasts in just about every language. But I did that with Japanese early on. There was something called the Japanese Pod 101 or whatever, and it exists in other languages as well. So audio systems are not at all to be dismissed. They are very, very good and can get you ahead faster, especially since you can find time to listen while you're doing other things, and you can basically save on time that way. So look into the leading audio systems. I'll list a bunch, but again, for me, Paul Noble is one of the best. And there's also the other ways. So I'm now recommending the Paul Noble system to my wife to learn Japanese, and she's doing it, and she's really enjoying it and quickly gaining on it. She goes on a walk in the morning with the baby, and she learns that way, simply listening. And you have to repeat. When you do these audio systems, make sure you always repeat, so it starts becoming natural for you to say the words and the sentences. Otherwise, you're just a passive listener, and the learning is not even half as easily done, as efficient. So there was that with French. I got very far into Duolingo, but I have to say, even though Duolingo, you gain knowledge fast, and you just keep going at it. It's like kind of like a game, you know, you get addicted to answering it fast, etc. However, the retention is not that great. Unless you go and start using it, say you learned all these lessons in Duolingo, unless you go to France and start speaking to people, you are not going to retain the Duolingo approach very much. Other methods that I just mentioned, including Rosetta Stone, have a lot better retention. And Rosetta Stone is interesting because it does not show you a translation. You are supposed to infer a meaning either from a sentence or from a picture, something like that, or like omission or whatever. You have to find, you know, like a little puzzle. Like they're saying this and this in this context, so that word must mean this and that word must mean that. You know, it's like a process of elimination, etc. And that's how it actually, because you have to do that effort, it mimics being a baby again and knowing no language. Because think about how you learn a language when you are, for the first time beginning, you know nothing. You start listening to native speakers, being your parents primarily, and over time you hear it so much, you start getting what they're saying. You say, I'm hearing this word over and over again in this context, so this word must mean that. And then there's all these other words, and then if your parents are good in the language, they're guiding you well and immersing you well instead of being quiet or impatient with you. And you start learning. I saw that with our 3-year-old. We immersed him very well. We never spoke too much so-called parentese, baby language to him. We simply spoke to him like a normal, intelligent human being, and he's very quickly picking everything up. He has such good grammar. Nobody ever taught him grammar. And that's the thing about Rosetta Stone as well. You mimic the way a child learns. You know, it's not the real deal again. because it's still software. It's still, you have to look at pictures, etc., follow lessons, but the immersion is higher in that method, and you retain a lot better than Duolingo. But Duolingo is nice to just quickly do a lesson here and there, remember things, or add more vocabulary, and again, go and use it right away, otherwise you forget it. So I did all these things with French. I went to France, and beforehand actually, I went to France without ever studying French, and I basically fell in love with the culture. I have videos from France I will be releasing on this channel that I recorded back then, and it was winter 2019, before the whole world got locked down. So when the lockdown happened, I spent months and months and months studying French, a lot, and I learned a lot. And I was very happy about it, because I thought, oh, just around the corner, we'll be able to travel again, and I'll go to France and I'll reinforce all this French, and I'll be very good at French. However, that didn't happen. The lockdowns dragged on for like 2 more years, and we had our child, Julian, in 2021, and we spent another 3 years raising him before I ever could go back to France. So again, I forgot a lot about it, but when I did go to France this year, I was able to use my French, and I got around France very easily and was able to function. But not just that, I believe that because I had some basic understanding of French, the French people treated me very nicely. And the thing about it is that you always hear how they're so rude in France, and they're just gonna be terrible to you, they're gonna make fun of you and hate you and whatever. I didn't experience any of that, and I think a lot of it is honestly propaganda, probably British propaganda, because that's who spreads the most propaganda against the French. But I believe that they were nice to me because I was speaking their language, and I was showing respect to their culture. Even though I can speak English perfectly, I was trying to be in tune, to be accustomed to where I'm at. I'm a guest, and I don't demand that they speak my way, So perhaps that made a difference in how I was treated in France, and I believe that is the case anywhere in the world. And now we'll get to the main point, which I want to make for this whole video. And the main point is this: when you learn a language, if you are waiting to get to a level where you are comfortable to express everything you think of like a native speaker in your own language, you actually handicap yourself. You will very much be just waiting for too long and have this paralysis. You'll be in a way paralyzing yourself from doing what you can at the level you are. You may be actually rather good at that point, but you don't have the confidence because in your mind you keep comparing your skill in that foreign language with your native language. And the truth is, unless you live there for 10, 20 years, you'll never be as good. So you shouldn't do that. Instead, you should flip that around, and you should use whatever little you have learned immediately. So go to a place, learn some stuff. You can take a basic course or just a basic book with common phrases and things that you need for a visit. Learn that and use it immediately. Don't worry that you don't sound the best. Don't worry. Some people say, oh, I sound like a caveman, I'm so embarrassed. And I get it. Personally, I dislike that feeling very much, where I have so much on my mind. Listen to my videos, for example. I can speak for hours, and I cannot do that in a foreign language. And it frustrates me, yes. But if you can overcome that and simply think about it the other way around, be like, I have acquired a new tool, a new skill set, and that skill set goes from 1 word to 10,000 words maybe. And every little word that you learn, you have now acquired it, and use it. And you should be proud to use it because it's a new skill. With every other new skill, you are that way, right? You go in and you say, here, I just learned this, let me use it. I'm proud of it, I'm happy about it. Not, I'm embarrassed about it, I don't want to use it. I have to wait until I get more skills before I can ever use them. You see what I mean? That is really the number one block, mental block for learning a language well. If you do, even if you know 5 words, but maybe 50, and even 500 are actually easy to learn. Something like 6 months of French got me to something between 1,000 and 2,000 words on Duolingo. So you see, you can easily cover that. But that many words actually cover almost everything you need to do in any country. And you can learn it in a few months. So they say the average person in any country on an average day uses only about 500 words. So expand that maybe to 1,000 or even 2,000 if you want to be quite good. That gives you a lot. And so the only thing missing is that you go and use it. And many people have started doing that. Even on YouTube, there are great examples of that. Most famously, Bold and Bankrupt. He always engages with the locals in their language, and he became famous doing that in India. That's how his whole channel started. And he kept saying words, and when the locals hear you saying their words, they get very happy, they engage. It reinforces your knowledge, and they speak back, you learn from them, instead of just being quiet and simply cowering, truly, just not having the confidence to say anything. And most recently, Bold and Bankrupt, he went to China. He's not bankrupt anymore, by the way. Big YouTube channel, makes money. Anyway, he went to China. He had no prior knowledge of Chinese whatsoever. He learned a few words, but he used them. And he learned or had a great experience. Sometimes it's confusing, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's wrong, but it doesn't matter because you're greatly benefiting by doing it versus not, you know. And that's my main takeaway from all this. Yes, you can go away, the long way, like I just described how I went about it with English. But the goal differs. So if your goal is to study academically, to be able to go to a country to completely fit into their workforce, to their schooling, colleges, etc., and take their standardized testing, and so you have to go the long way. And over time, in every language, you have to go the long way. But if your goal is to visit a place and have the best experience possible and incrementally learn their language and culture, you can begin from zero and you can quickly become conversational, and it almost starts to happen for free. You just keep going to a place, keep practicing, keep picking up a word here and there. Sometimes on a trip, you'll pick up 50 words. Another trip, you may stay longer, do more complicated things. You may pick up 200 words. Another time, you may go back home, you're inspired, and you pick up a learning material or a book or something in that language, and you may learn another 500 words. And if you persist, you will end up with a few thousand. And that is actually what most people in that country use. They don't use 10,000, 50,000 words, you know. Only extremely bookish people, whatever, PhDs and journalists, etc., writers, use that many words. And so there you go. You can skip all this stuff and you can go ahead, have fun. And it actually is more memorable that way. It sticks with you, you learn faster, and it retains. While if you learn it from the book, there's a level of abstraction. You're actually not exactly immersing and using that language like a native or like a baby learning it. You're actually removed one layer because you're learning from a book and you're doing exercises. You're not talking to the real person. You're not using it in a real situation. And that makes a ton of difference in the retention of that language. So, number one advice, pick a culture you really like. Start visiting there often and start picking up the language incrementally and start using it right away. And I've done that now with 3 languages, with Japanese, with Spanish and French. And I'm about to go use my Japanese again. I'm really excited because I went in 2009, I studied some more for another 2 years, and I didn't use it since then. So I cannot wait to go use it and just reinforce my basic knowledge of it. And I did that in Mexico with Spanish, and I did it with French in France, and it worked really, really well. So that's my goal, and that's my advice when it comes to studying a language. Immerse, 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 and don't hesitate. One more thing I want to expand on, and that is actually really important, is that learning a language is not just about learning the language. Yes, you do acquire the language as a skill, which is very valuable, but it is a gateway to the culture and the entire body of cultural output those people have created. So you enrich yourself tremendously. But more than that, you start learning about the ways they think, about their values, about their customs, everything else. And this enriches you tremendously. And even beyond that, you are expanding your brain, because your brain thinks in language. When you close your eyes or sit still and do nothing, actually language emerges in your head as thoughts. And they have the same patterns because it is the same language. Normally you think in your own language. But if you immerse enough, if you learn a language well enough, you start beginning to see how other people learn. And actually, the more different a language is, the more pronounced that effect is. I have felt that most strongly with learning Japanese, for example, because the language works so differently. And even though it's different, it does not make it by any means worse or something like that. It's actually a beautiful language, and it's very rich as well, and it's complex. And so if you start getting good at it, you start realizing how you're actually becoming more intelligent, because that language, the usage of it, is expanding your brain. It's creating new patterns and thoughts and things like that. So you then gain so much more than learning the ability to speak. And that's really my favorite thing about learning a language. You now become, in a way, a fuller, a richer human being on the inside, simply by learning a language. And because of that, it's always been one of my very favorite things in the world to do. And you can so easily, if you have a eager, kind of a hungry, curious mind, you exhaust whatever is around you in your vicinity, whether that is a physical vicinity or mentally or, culturally. You can easily devour everything and then it's gone. But guess what? Go over to a different culture in a different language, and it's like turning over the rocks on the beach and you see it crawling with all kinds of little different animals. It's exactly like that when you're learning a language. You learn French, well, you go to France and you realize how much depth there is to French culture, how many things they do so well that you can learn from. And the language is truly the biggest barrier, and that's the case everywhere. Other countries like that, definitely I keep talking about Japan. It's yet another country with great detail, great sophistication. That is a very beautiful place as well. In both of these countries, if you can find others, I like, for example, Turkey a lot. Find countries that you really like, that offer a great degree of complexity and cultural heritage, and you then start going there repeatedly. Now at this age, I have seen enough of the world that I know exactly what I like and where to get it. And so I am now keen on returning to some places and learning more and more and getting more and more depth out of them. And so I have chosen several countries and a few languages that I think will do it for me for the rest of my life at this point. And those, like I said, are Spanish, Japanese, and French. Also, I know some Russian because I'm a Slavic speaker. My language has so much crossover with Russian. And growing up there was also a lot of Russian cultural influence. They have great literature as well, and they make good movies as well. And so there too, you can do that. However, the political situation is such that I've actually never been to Russia. But that's yet another language I can make use of if things improve there. So beyond that, I know English and Bulgarian. And so with those languages, for the rest of my life, I can have amazing experiences and learn and really be cherishing and expanding the entire time. Especially English and Spanish, you can go to the whole world. It just doesn't end. But yeah, there are beautiful countries with beautiful languages, and it takes just knowing the language to crack that door open, and you tremendously benefit from it. See you soon.